when I started in this world, I thought, okay, I've been taught about preseason, season, postseason, blah, 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 blah. That sounds a lot like pre-deployment, deployment, post-deployment. It doesn't work that way. And so I think, you mentioned coaches using this as a safety blanket. I truly do. I think that the path dependency error we're making here is that these frameworks give us like a language that we can all have the same ideas within. But like I mentioned, if you're so dependent, and I'll use that word monolith again, if you're so dependent upon this monolith that you can't actually take a step back and address the needs of the athlete in front of you, that's the whole reason why we're having this conversation in the first place. This week's episode is brought to you by Teamworks. If you have performance data scattered across apps, spreadsheets, group chats, it means things get missed. Teamworks brings it all together. Training, nutrition, scheduling, communication, all in one platform built for the people responsible for readiness. Learn more today at teamworkstactical.com. Team, welcome to another week of controversy, another week of internet debating. It's Mops and Mo's. We're back. We're live. New setup, too. I got rid of my wooden background if you're watching.
Drew has a whole studio situation.
Boom.
A carefully placed UNC basketball.
Signed. You can't see it, but Roy Williams signed that.
Look at you.
Books. I
That's
literally
how he's smart.
Well, before we recorded, I went up to the attic and just grabbed a handful of books and tried to make, that's Leonardo da Vinci's biography.
You're supposed to tell people you were just reading those.
Well, I just finished these. There's also a set of golf clubs.
Those get more use than the books.
No, those are hickories. Those are wooden golf clubs. I don't use them very often. But we're live, team. We're going to go after periodization again tonight. Among other things.
We are going to go after periodization. I feel like...
God, I'm out of focus again.
We have a couple stops to get through. First, Drew, after putting in all this effort to his new setup, can't keep his camera in focus. There, he's back.
I got it. We're back.
Second, we have some breaking news from today that we have to discuss briefly, I think. But before that...
Do we?
We do.
Oh.
But before that, we had an exchange. Did I send you the video?
You sent me a video that I think you were sent of a podcast. Yep. I don't remember what podcast it was. We didn't make this
Kyle
question.
Sent it to me. So Kyle, if you're listening.
Thanks.
You,
Kyle. The question at hand is a performance-related question. I don't know if people watched the 4th of July, what is it, Nathan's hot dog eating contest. Joey Chestnut, the dude, he's he makes Messi look like a Little League soccer player.
It's a generational talent.
Generational the dude is unstoppable. He just casually, I think it was, what was it this year, 76 or something like that?
I don't know.
60
I don't watch that.
And it wasn't even a PR. And he won. I watched it. It's disgusting. And he won by, I think, 10 or 15 glizzies. It was absurd. But the question that was posed was, you have Usain Bolt, and Joey Chestnut. They're at the starting line of a 100-meter stretch of track. They both have to eat one hot dog and then run the 100. Who wins?
And before we go too far, I will have to ask you for your stance on this. One thing I didn't send you.
I've thought about this way too much.
One thing I didn't send you that I did see a couple days ago is we have video of Usain Bolt providing his answer. But I won't give away what it was because I want to hear what your thoughts are.
I think Joey Chestnut wins.
I think hands down.
10 times out of 10. And the dude on the podcast was like, I could eat a hot dog in like 10 seconds. You absolutely could not. And you cannot eat a hot dog in 10 seconds.
So to be clear, 100 meters is a pretty short distance.
Yes.
10 seconds is an insurmountable, that's
hot dog time.
Because Chestnut's putting that hot dog down.
He's doing if y'all haven't seen this, fair warning, but the move is to dip the bun in the water, shove it in your mouth, and then basically just
inhale
absorb the hot dog. Yeah, I think it's like dogs per minute. There's like a DPM or something that they use in the competition. And he's at like 3.2 DPMs or something. It's stupid how fast this guy. So I think,
but the other important thing, I don't want to miss this. It does not matter how fast his 2nd through 70th hot dogs go down. It
Yeah,
only
just an
matters how
N of
fast the
1.
first one goes down.
And I don't think anyone's ever seen Joey just do one hot like, the dude probably
Yeah.
done.
He doesn't do 1 RM.
No. Yeah, he
Like,
doesn't yeah, he's more of a muscle endurance guy. Slurps it, and then he's got I mean, you know, how fast can he run 100 meters? 15 seconds? 20
Joey
seconds?
Chestnut?
Yeah. Like, what's a
Like
normal 100-meter
like
time?
fast enough that that lead is not recoverable. Like,
The question is, does he finish the whole thing before Usain Bolt finishes his hot dog?
I think that's a real question.
What did Usain Bolt what do you say?
I agree with you completely. I think
Yeah.
if we started to talk about distances like 200 or 400 or 800, it starts to be a conversation. But
100 meters is no shot.
in 100 meters, you're not coming back from the difference in how fast Chestnut's down in that hot dog.
That might be the
Um,
ultimate hybrid challenge.
and I will say this thing is kind of taking the internet by storm. I just did a quick Google, and
Good.
everybody's talking about the Glizzy Gauntlet, and like it's getting attention.
I love that. They need to put those two guys together.
Attention to the point that like there's now video of a guy showing the video to Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt agrees with us. Usain Bolt does not think he could win that challenge.
No, there's no way, man. People underestimate like, did you ever do the saltine challenge?
I'm aware of it. I did not do it.
I've tried it many times. It's 7 saltines in a minute for anybody who wants to give that a go. Good luck. It's impossible.
Can you like can you consume anything else in the minute?
Doesn't matter. No, you can't. No, I don't think
Okay.
so. Yeah. And I've tried pre-hydrating. I've tried having just the most amount of water. It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
You get 1, 2, 3, 4-ish down, and you're like, this is pretty easy. And then,
Yeah.
man, do you hit a wall.
It's like folding a piece of paper. Like the first
It's
few
like
times are really easy, and then it becomes
Yeah.
impossible.
It's like sucking down sawdust. So, the Glizzy Gauntlet, man. Well, hey, shameless plug for Long and Strong, gang. If you want to show up for our next phase of training, the Glizzy Gauntlet is what we will be training for.
Oh no!
How would you periodize that?
Don't get us too far ahead of ourselves. I have another topic that I have to hit you with for some quick discussion.
I don't know if I know what this one's going to be.
You seem to have forgotten it, but like you're aware of it. I know you saw it and responded earlier.
Oh, the testosterone thing.
Yeah, TR troops.
Woo! Wild. Wild.
Fascinating, first of all. I don't think we'll deep dive it here. That may end up being an entire episode as we figure out what this policy looks like and how the rollout goes. Just like rapid fire thoughts. I thoughts and prayers for the primary care physicians and the endocrinologists of the military. Good luck, Godspeed. I hope you get through this.
Thinking about you.
Other stuff. One, if you're a soldier who like wants to get TRT,
just work out before your blood test.
Probably the easiest thing in the world to like temporarily depress your testosterone levels.
Yeah.
With like the right stupid shenanigans.
Hot dogs.
I do think we should make sure that soldiers are like broadly aware of the consequences of exogenous testosterone on male fertility.
You should probably reference what it is that you're talking about.
I should probably explain that. If you're catching up, if you live under a rock, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth announced a like military-wide program to test every service member 30 and older on testosterone, optional testing if you're under 30.
It's part of your PHA.
It will be part of your PHA, correct. As a reserve service member, I'm wondering if they're going to like change the contract for reserve service members. And like, if I'm going to get tested on my next PHA, who knows? And it gets a little fuzzy because it says like under the guidance of medical professionals, but like if we're following medical professional guidance, we wouldn't do universal testing for testosterone. That's actually like specifically not recommended.
Great point.
So we already blew that one, but whatever. We'll see where this goes. I do think people should be aware of the fertility consequences. I know for some men, the sperm count suppression when you go on testosterone is temporary and it comes back after you go off of it. But for other men, I believe there are, and like we'll get some real experts to talk about this at some point, but like long-lasting fertility consequences.
Well, I just randomly pulled up LinkedIn. I don't know if we know Brian Stepanenko.
Yeah. Big functional medicine guy.
He says this is going to make military healthcare practitioners nervous, but it doesn't have to. And then Kevin Bernstein, friend of the show, excited about it, made a good comment that identifying this in women is important. Um,
I do think it's a little bit interesting. I'll reveal my cynicism on this whole thing real quick. Um, like, why are we only looking at testosterone if we're starting to care about hormones in general?
that's a good
That says
point.
a lot about like how serious this is versus like focusing on one mechanism instead of others. Um,
A couple MDs in the comment section here have some
there
pretty good points.
there's some pretty valid like why aren't we talking about like HRT more broadly, not just TRT? Like hormone replacement therapy is a broader thing than just testosterone replacement therapy.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions.
Well, this was the question I had, and I'm quoting a doctor here, which makes me feel important. But who's going to account for the high false positivity rate in high stress and sleep deprived environments?
Yeah,
Yeah. What is the number needed to treat versus the number needed to harm? Yada, yada, yada. And then he says, truly asking, understanding that our functional medicine folks are at the tip of the sphere. So I don't know if that was a
oops.
typo.
There are no tips on spheres.
That's a great point. Although, although if you gave a sphere testosterone, Alex, there's no telling. Um, So yeah, testosterone, hot dogs, 100-meter sprints. This is your military fitness podcast. Shall we?
I want to find one fast one
I
before
was gonna
we
say you look like
continue.
you're looking for something.
I'm on the American Urological Association website to like find their testing guidelines. Um, Executive summary: testosterone testing and prescriptions have nearly tripled in recent years. However, it is clear from clinical practice that there are many men using testosterone without a clear indication. Some studies estimate that up to 25% of men who receive testosterone therapy do not have their testosterone tested prior to initiation of treatment. That's pretty bad.
Mm.
Of men who are treated with testosterone, nearly half do not have their testosterone levels checked after therapy commences. That's also bad. Up to a third of men who are placed on testosterone therapy do not meet the criteria to be diagnosed as testosterone deficient. Also, probably bad. And then there are a large percentage of men in need of testosterone therapy who fail to receive it due to clinician concerns surrounding prostate cancer development and cardiovascular events, among other things.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think there's like a pretty significant conversation to be had, and I think we're mostly going to see memes.
We should do a testosterone episode.
I've I've thought about bringing back Dr. Nadolsky, who was on previously. He was a military endocrinologist. Um,
Oh yeah.
he's already posted about it a little bit. He is concerned, and he sends thoughts and prayers for his former compatriots, active duty military endocrinologists.
This one's for you guys. Pour one out. Um
Sorry, we should wrap that up. And
No, you're fine. So team, for context, I don't know what we're going to call this episode yet. Perhaps we'll just call it the death of periodization because that seems to get people going. Last week, 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I wrote an article for our website and I called it the death of periodization. And I did that on purpose because I wanted clicks and it worked. But also because that's what it was about. I then, for perhaps the first time in my professional life, made Alex proud. I'm kidding. Um, Posted it on LinkedIn just to see what would happen on LinkedIn. Turns out it works there too. And then,
very different audience reactions across the
well,
platform.
correct. And then I did something else that I never do, which is that you put it on Instagram and I got in fights with people on Instagram.
Mhm.
So last week was wild,
Yeah,
guys.
to be clear, team, I've been really busy lately, and like normally I'm the one getting in fights on Instagram,
Yeah.
so I had to tag in Drew.
And it was
Uh,
fun. I had a good
yeah,
time.
yeah.
But there's clearly, this is clearly a sensitive subject. And so, we wanted to talk about it here. We've curated a handful of the comments that were left on both LinkedIn and Instagram. We've got a bit of a framework in terms of what we want to talk about. I will probably more than once refer folks to the blog because that article is up there. I also have a kind of a, I guess, a second piece that I wrote called The Art of Training. And then kind of as we're recording this, I'm working on a third piece. This was never meant to be a series, but the third piece is like, here's how I actually write programs. I think I kind of grew up in this space, really falling in love with the periodization critique literature. But the one piece that I was never truly certain about was like, okay, what does this mean for training? Like, how do you program with this information? So I do want to, I guess, in some capacity, provide that to folks. So stay tuned, effectively,
Is there, before we get too far into this, and this is me like skipping several steps,
please.
um, you're a fan of the periodization critique literature, which like that's a fancy way of saying
Yes.
you're a fan of John Kiley.
Among other,
Um,
he's not the only one, but he's probably the most prominent.
for sure. Um, I don't remember the title, but there was a not necessarily like a research article, but there was a letter written by a few people about like stop being mean to periodization. Do you know the article I'm talking about?
No,
Over the
but I
course
want
of
to
this
read it.
recording, I will try and find it. Um,
I know that there's the two primary articles from John, who we've had on before. It was a while ago. Are periodization theory confronting an inconvenient truth, and then periodization paradigms. Those are like the two. And then there's a back and forth between him and I forget who else, across a couple of journals, if I recall, where they're basically in the editorial section debating periodization, and or maybe it's block periodization, something like that. So there is, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's its own body of research necessarily, but there is a fair amount of like scientific professional writing out there that critiques periodization, which I think is good. I think you should do that. I don't know if my Death of Periodization article like falls into that body of work. I wouldn't give myself that much credit, but I do, and bottom line up front here, I don't think that there's a place for periodization in tactical human performance. I will die on that hill, and I think based on the back and forth, LinkedIn is a little bit of a weird place because everyone just like agrees with you. But on Instagram, there was quite a bit of back and forth, and we will get into that. Not a single person was able to define periodization. They basically would just come up with their own definitions and then argue from that position. Um, which, maybe some of them are listening to this and they're still mad at me, and I apologize, but I want folks to understand that when you debate something, you have to both be speaking the same language. And so maybe we should start this by like defining terms.
I
Um,
I have not yet found the paper I was looking for, but
that's okay. The
I did
search
stumble upon one
continues.
that I'm going to need to read that I'm sad I didn't know about until just now, which is periodization, variation in the definition and discrepancies in study design.
Oh yeah, it's a messy,
Um,
messy field.
that's the real problem here, which
Yeah,
is what
and
you're already
we'll
getting at.
we'll get into some of that. We'll get into the quote unquote research.
So are you going to break down some definitions?
Let's do it. I will read from my notes. And one thing that happened on a couple of occasions in the online discourse is that the definitions that people were using became so broad that you couldn't, like, they were unfalsifiable. You couldn't debate them because they just would phrase it in such a way that it accounted for literally everything. And that's not what periodization is. So I'll use the NSCA's definition here, and then we may pull from some old Soviet
Before
stuff.
you dive in, I want to say we have on this podcast before been decently critical of the NSCA.
We have.
Um, I'm like semi okay with their definition for like a one sentencer.
Fair enough. Here it goes. This is from the NSCA. I think this is from like 2017. So
About there, yeah.
it's older. But anyway, periodization is the logical and systematic process of sequencing and integrating training interventions in order to achieve peak performance at appropriate time points. I don't know
It's
if you have
it's
thoughts.
it's pretty broad. I think
It's broad.
the fact that it says sequencing gets you into conversations about like how long different adaptations last and which adaptations underpin other adaptations, which I think is
Hmm.
like a fairly crucial component of any real definition here. And the fact that it says achieving peak performance at appropriate time points, because And like people in our comments have debated whether that's a relevant portion of it or not, whether peaking is inherently part of periodization. But if you go back, and we're going to discuss this as we go into like other people's definitions, but if you read like Matveyev stuff, if you read Platonov stuff, if you read Bompa stuff, like the amount of time they spend on discussions of two specific topics, but like the cycles per year and
Mhm.
the percent of the time an athlete's best performance was at their quote unquote main competition, I I I do think planned peaking for specific competition dates is like an inextricable element if you're talking about what historically has been referred to as periodization.
Correct. And so here is like I wrote about this. I'm going to talk about it. If you're listening and you don't like me, just at least please listen to what I'm about to say. It boils down to forecasting. Like periodization, regardless of which definition you want to go with, regardless of your kind of Russian of choice or Russian du jour, if you will, the definitions that are put forward around periodization all have to do with forecasting adaptations with confidence. No matter if you throw like some sequencing language in there or some peaking language in there or whatever buzzwords you want to use, what we are doing is we are forecasting biological adaptations. This is my second bottom line up front. You cannot forecast biological adaptations. Like I think people get married when people are married to periodization, what they are married to is this idea that it is the only way to plan and organize training. When I offer a counter argument around what I call forecast or navigating or planning, as I did in the article, I'm not saying you shouldn't logically think about training. That was never an argument I was trying to make. But for some reason, that's all. Oh, you're telling me I shouldn't plan? No, be logical with your training. Like think through it, have order. Just stop forecasting because you're wrong. You can't do it. Like if you hand an athlete a program that predicts what they're going to do in 12 weeks, that's not how biology works or physiology or psychology for that matter. So every definition that you come across, whether it's the NSCA or like you mentioned, the various Soviet guys, whether it's block, nonlinear, linear, conjugate, west side, they are all predicated on forecasting adaptations. You cannot forecast biology.
You have set me up for like one of the things I find most ironic in this whole conversation. There is a profession that used periodization as a foundational concept long before strength and conditioning. And if you go on Wikipedia, you will find that like there are two different things. There's a sports periodization page if you want to dive into periodization,
There
but
you
if you
go.
look up periodization itself, historians have dibs. Um, and in history, periodization is the process or study of categorizing the past into discrete, quantified, and named blocks of time for the purpose of study or analysis, which I find hilarious because if you look at how like early periodization theory was developed, it was just doing that to the training logs of athletes.
Yeah. And the other thing that annoys me a little bit about people, I won't say coaches because I feel like I'd give coaches a lot of shit. Alex, what kind of government was the Soviet Union running back when this stuff was becoming more popular?
Hey, I feel like you're leading me towards a point, Drew.
What I mean, just I don't know, throw out a guess.
There
Starts
there
with a
is
C.
there is an argument to be made that uh more important than your athletic development model, more important than your programming model, more important than your selection model is the ability to throw large volumes of genetic raw material at a problem and filter
Yeah,
out the ones that succeed.
yeah. It's called communism. And I know we're being a little bit sarcastic. That's kind of how we roll. But folks, recognize, please, if you will, most of what you're reading in Soviet sports science literature has to do with mapping sports science onto like communist economic planning. So when we look at blocks and moving from one phase to the next and planning it out, and it's beautifully written on it, like that is economic planning in a communist government. The fact that, to your point, it works for some people, is fine, but just acknowledge the thousands and thousands and thousands of human beings that just got thrown out in the trash because that system did not work for them. And oh, by the way, throw in a hefty amount of performance enhancing drugs because, again, this is the 60s and 70s. So we started talking about testosterone on this episode. Maybe there was a reason why. Um, okay, so I will steal from John Kiley here, and I will do this several times throughout this episode, but just with regards to defining periodization. So he states that the term was originally employed to describe programs taking the form of predetermined sequential chains of specifically focused training periods. And this is what I think was pretty interesting because this is what happened on Instagram. He says, however, today the term is frequently indiscriminately employed to describe any form of training plan, regardless of the structure. And we kind of realized this in real time as we were debating these things online. But there are, I think, some assumptions that, again, if you sort of critically think through your own position, wherever you stand on this argument, there's a couple of assumptions, and I'll list off 5 of them. Number 1, you have established timeframes that exist for the development and retention of specific fitness adaptations. So that gets into some of your kind of traditional block periodization stuff. Um, Another one that's pretty common is that various fitness attributes are developed in some sort of hierarchy. So, like strength before power, you know, endurance before speed, or whichever direction you want to go with that one. Um, this one again gets into some of the block versus your conjugate versus your nonlinear that we talked about. These idealized training structures or schemes that you assume can just be generalized across athletic subgroups. And I'll pause for a second there because
Mm,
if you're the type of coach that comes into a new environment, and we see this happen all the time with something like H2F, and you say, "Oh, I'm a nonlinear guy, or I'm a block guy, or I'm a West Side guy," that's what you're doing. You are taking an idealized training structure that might look good in a book or on a spreadsheet, and you're just kind of generalizing it across athletic subgroups, regardless of what that athletic group presents to you as the problem that they need solved. I'll throw CrossFit under the bus here for a second because if we want to go so far as to say that that's like an idealized training structure, quote unquote, there was a time where CrossFit felt that they could solve any problem. They could train you for a marathon, they could train you for professional football, they could train you for strongman. Over time, we've realized that that's not really the case. Like you do have to specialize in some sense for whatever it is that you're training for. Um, the fourth one, this one annoys the shit out of me, but biological adaptations to a given training intervention follow a predictable course. They do not. And we'll get into some of the science behind that here in a little bit. And then the one that we've already hit on a couple of times, and we will continue to hit on it, but it's this assumption that appropriate future training can be adequately forecasted. So, for example, if you say, oh, I'm going to take my athlete through a 6-week block of this, and then we're going to do 4 weeks of that. It's like, well, what if they adapted to the thing in 3 weeks instead of 6 weeks? Or what if they adapted in 8 weeks? Like you wouldn't know that if you had already laid all of this out and insisted that the athlete stuck to that plan. So those are the assumptions. And then I think we're going to take a quick pivot to some social media quotes.
I'm going to attempt as we go through this conversation to like sprinkle in relevant comments we got, whether on LinkedIn or Instagram. So this, like as Drew's been talking about some of this, it cued me in on a few of the comments that I want to go and reference. I do apologize if people in the comments wanted like their name in the podcast. I didn't keep track of the names. I just copy pasted the text, so I don't remember whose comment is whose.
But hey,
Sorry.
thanks for engaging.
I do appreciate you guys.
Yeah.
And like
Keep it up.
hopefully people after listening to this go back and fire those comments up again. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
But a few should I'll do LinkedIn first. And then I'll go to a couple of different Instagram ones that were relevant to the comments you just made. First one, and I appreciated this, but I want to add a layer to it. And I don't think this was the entire comment. I think I just snipped part of it. But somebody said, there are some important differences between athletic competition and soldiering. Predictability, length of performance, and stability of teams are some of the biggest issues. I like addressing the stability of teams issues
Mhm.
across most military organizations. You replace roughly a third of the organization every year. And it means you have people at like very, very different training ages throughout the organization and people who have been on your program and people who haven't been on your program. That's a challenge that's going to disrupt a lot of periodized type of approaches to training. One I don't think it gets discussed enough is like the homogeneity of teams.
Big
Like
word there.
if you get a football team or you get a soccer team or you get a basketball team, even before you have seen the team, you probably have a pretty good idea of what they look like, their body composition, athletic things they're good at, athletic things they're bad at. Like you're getting an archetypal athlete where like standardized approaches across that group, they're probably going to respond in relatively similar ways just because the system that's filtered them to get to the point where they're with you on that sport doing that thing together
Mhm.
like gives you a common baseline on certain things. That is like entirely absent on in military organizations of almost every flavor. Like regardless of whether you're combat arms, non-combat arms, special operations, conventional, whatever, you're gonna have a guy who's like 220 and huge and has been lifting his whole life, and then a guy who's 145 pounds and ran cross country and has never lifted, and everything in between. And like various injury histories that you would never see in some other settings, just like the layers of things that complicate it. And like, would it be possible to design periodized programs for every single one of those people? Totally possible, but we're rapidly leaving plausible behind when you account for all of the extra factors. Moving over to Instagram, where it was a little spicier. Um, I know this first one will get Drew going, but this one says, "You guys are discussing periodization as if it's some monolith. It's not. The
Ah,
concept of
yes.
periodizing training is just how training is structured to progress physical qualities over time, regardless of what the structure looks like." And I like you got to assume, and maybe this is just like patriotism embodied, because somewhere a dead Soviet is rolling in his grave, like deeply offended at what you've done to his baby, right? Like that's
Periodization is a monolith. Like I think I even pointed that out in the comment. Like that's exactly why I wanted to have this discussion in this forum is because it is a monolith. Like, and maybe I should pause and like hit that for a second because folks like why even have this conversation? The issue here that I have seen, and I've been doing this for a lot of years, is that folks that kind of grow up in strength and conditioning or coaches who've been, perhaps coming from a sporting environment where there is some control over the calendar and the confounding variables and all these other things, like there is so little questioning of the fact that this might not even be the right approach that you just like it truly is like to quote Thomas Kuhn, who for folks that have no idea what I'm talking about, he's a philosopher of science, weird reference, but he's the one that introduced paradigm shifts, the phrase paradigm shift into the vocabulary. And if you assume that periodization is the only lens through which you can view training, you are going to fall on your face every day of the week in a tactical training environment for all of the reasons you just mentioned, which is that there's no homogeneity, there's no predictability, there's very little access to resources in most cases. You you're working in a world where you need to have a solution for N of one type situations, but because of the coach athlete ratio, you can't operate in an N of one type space. So you have to have a system you can industrialize. I can understand why periodization provides that sort of safety blanket because it does off the cuff just present to you a 12-week thing or a 16, or even in some cases, if we're looking at the Olympics, like, holy shit, I have a 4-year program right here. I can download it and I can share it with my whole brigade. But if all you ever view is periodization and you think that's the only way to train, you're missing so much contemporary biopsychosocial literature that hopefully we'll get into. I saw you just dropped an undulating periodization model picture into the notes.
we'll we'll get
Yeah,
there. We'll get there. Let me do one more quote before I go
that's
back to
great.
why that stuff bothers me.
I haven't seen that one in a while. Undulating
Um,
periodization model, folks, if you want to Google
we'll
that.
we'll get there. Um, I'll put an asterisk on your comment that like periodization is a monolith. I think the people who are going to react badly to that are all the ones who are going to say there are different periodization models.
They all
Um,
have the same, just let me pause you. They all
sure.
have the same assumptions. Those 5
Yes.
assumptions we laid out, they
Yes.
all have the same assumptions.
But I think that's where people are going to say like, oh, but there's this periodization, and you could choose one
No,
that's more
no,
appropriate for your population.
they all have the same assumptions.
Sure. My other Instagram comment before we get back to working through the material here. And this one triggered me in a couple different ways. He said, periodization provides a framework for what to emphasize and when to test. All tactical training periods should be comprehensive, but got a 4x36 in 8 weeks, emphasize aerobic conditioning. 12-mile ruck on the calendar, emphasize strength, durability, and ruck progressions. All right. I know you want to go off. Drew's eyes are different sizes right now. He's tweaking.
No,
But
I just
I'm gonna take the mic first, and I'm gonna
please.
break down
It's incredibly vague.
a few of the problems here. It says what to emphasize and when to test. Like the fact that you shouldn't be pre-planning when to test things is like a foundational part of tactical. Like the PT tests that happen in tactical populations, the 4x36 he references, the 12-mile ruck, the PT test in general, all of those are supposed to be spot checks just to confirm readiness of a thing you should be prepared for all the time. That's like literally the whole idea. Anyway, breaking them down, he said 4x36. Drew, do you know what a 4x36 is?
I was going to ask you, what is that? I don't know what that is.
It's a 4-mile run in 36 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've heard of this. Yep.
That's a 9-minute mile pace.
It's very slow.
If you have to fucking periodize to achieve 4x36 as a goal that you're peaking for, I'm sorry. Like,
let me add some flavor to the point you're making. I think to get somebody, and I'm talking now to folks who see a 9-minute mile and like kind of shiver a little bit because there are people out there where that feels fast. I could get you there with a very simple training plan. I don't need a Soviet peaking structure to get you to 4x. And I think that's the point you're trying to make.
That is the whole point.
And that gets to what we were just saying. Like, if you're
these are achievable goals where the only prerequisite is consistency.
If periodization is such a monolith to you that you apply it to like an unfit individual who just needs to get to a 9-minute mile, you friend are not coaching, you are programming. Anyway, carry on.
No, you've made the exact point I was working towards.
Sorry.
I think like,
I will give some credit to somebody. Like, yes, you can emphasize certain things at certain times. You can, and I refer to them as volume knobs. Like if you on your calendar have like a Norwegian 12-mile coming up or like whatever, you can turn up the volume a little bit on the endurance training within the context of like the broader scheme.
Yeah.
You don't need to have predicted that in advance. And you certainly can't, again, I'm trying to be careful not to go down a peaking rabbit hole because that's a whole nother can of worms. I'll just pause really quickly. Team, just because an athlete is fitter at the end of your training cycle than the beginning is not scientific evidence that peaking or periodization is a thing. All that tells you is that progressively increasing stimuli over time makes people fitter. So settle down with your peaking commentary.
I would argue it doesn't even improve that progressively increasing stimuli over time. It proves that like exercising consistently will make you better at the things you did.
A whole mess of things. Yeah, for sure. A whole mess of things.
My last one before we close out on that comment is that he's basically saying it's nearly the reverse of periodization where we just like completely shift what we train for, not in a sequential way, but based on whatever the unit put on the calendar.
Which supports
like that. I mean, I kind of agree.
Yeah. I would agree
but like, I don't think it's periodization.
It's not. And that goes back to the point we made at the beginning. Gang, if you want to come online and argue this, like, please do. First and foremost, I had a really good time last week debating this with folks. I found it incredibly titillating. But if you want to do that, please define first what periodization is. And if it is so vague as to encompass literally every aspect of training, it's not a conversation we can have. You have to stick to a definition. The definition, as I laid it out at the beginning, is forecasting adaptations over time, sequentially or otherwise, and predicting biological outcomes. So, do you want to speak to this graph that you dropped in the notes?
I do want to speak to the graph.
Okay. Team, we all sleep. We all conduct a bunch of activities. We all train and we all recover from stress. Teamworks pulls it all together in real-time readiness dashboards because when data is connected, readiness follows. Visit teamworkstactical.com today to learn more. Team, this episode of Mops and Mo's is brought to you by Train Heroic. Train Heroic is a reliable, well-designed platform for programming, tracking, and communicating with athletes. If you've been with us for any length of time, you will know that Train Heroic is the platform that we use to power our own training, long and strong, which you can find at our website, mopsandmoes.com. If you're looking for a solid platform to support your own coaching, whether it's your full-time role or a side hustle, Train Heroic is definitely worth checking out. You can use the link in any of our show notes, you can find it in our newsletter, or you can head to our website, mopsandmoes.com/training to get your first week for free.
Drew, have you ever walked into a classroom
Yes.
where a bunch of soldiers are sitting there and somebody's
times.
briefing this?
Yes.
And to be clear, I have been the one in front of a classroom
It's probably how we met.
going over stuff like this. Actually, it is essentially how we met because like the time that I would have been the person in front of the room teaching stuff like this would have been when I was at the fitness school, and that's where we originally connected.
Yeah.
And
Good times.
And I'm not saying like all of that is bad. Like it's interesting knowledge, and soldiers have questions about it, and they want to know about it. Like, cool. But I think in almost every situation, the reason material like these periodization models gets taught is because it like lets coaches feel smart. It's a comfort zone thing where they can cite names and studies and put something on the board that's got a graphic. Because like at the end of the day, all I really care about in almost every tactical population is like achieve consistency and then figure out how to adjust around all the other competing factors. Like that's most of it. And the particular graphic I've put up here, it doesn't really matter. I just Googled periodization slide and took the first one that was good and dropped it into the notes so Drew could look at it.
Drew has seen this
But
before.
it's got like the GPP phase and then the special phase and then the pre-comp and then the comp and then the transition, and it's got the volume line and it's got the intensity line and it's got the technique line layered over them. And like
Yeah,
I just don't think
on.
it's helpful for almost any tactical population I've ever interacted with.
It's not, because what often happens is folks will take this type of thing, and I've done this before. You'll take this type of thing and you will try to map it onto a deployment cycle, just as an example. And there's this myth that you can peak for a deployment. Let's just pause for a second here. Even in the most Soviet of Soviet literature, peaking only, like quote unquote peaking, if that is such a thing, whatever, phases of maximum fitness, that only exists for like a week at most. So if most deployments are several weeks, a month, several months, a year, I think coaches oftentimes, oh, we're going to peak you for your deployment. What does that mean? You're just going to get them to some insane level of fitness and then they're going to get on an airplane and go to the desert and just stay fit that long? We all know that's not how it works. So and again, like I said, when I started in this world, I thought, okay, I've been taught about preseason, season, postseason, blah, 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 blah. That sounds a lot like pre-deployment, deployment, post-deployment. It doesn't work that way. And so I think, you mentioned coaches using this as a safety blanket. I truly do. I think that the path dependency error we're making here is that these frameworks give us like a language that we can all have the same ideas within. But like I mentioned, if you're so dependent, and I'll use that word monolith again, if you're so dependent upon this monolith that you can't actually take a step back and address the needs of the athlete in front of you, that's the whole reason why we're having this conversation in the first place.
And that brings me to another piece of social media content that I put out as a result of this. Some people who were participating in the poll didn't really know like why I was putting it up. I left it out of context kind of on purpose, but I put up a poll about like, did your training peak you physically for your deployment, or did you like actually have your best physical training while you were deployed? Because that environment's much more conducive to like consistent, undisrupted training than the garrison environment is. I think the end result was like 95% said the latter, like they got much fitter on deployment. And
Yeah.
I'll acknowledge for the big time Army doctrine nerds and stuff, like that's an assumption we can't make for large scale combat operations. Like if we go to like a massive ground war with a near peer threat, we can't assume people are going to get to like lift every day as they get ready for it in theater. Good point. Worth considering as I get into the next topic, which is Drew, I think I got you to review Matt Clark's article within the last week or so.
Oh, yeah.
The 8 myths that weaken combat readiness. And
Mm-hmm.
Matt, if you're out there listening, I know we exchanged emails like 2 years ago or something, and I'm sorry I dropped the ball on scheduling an episode with you. We would like to have you on. Probably Lieutenant Colonel at this point, I think. Really good article. We'll drop it in the show notes. He does a really good job of laying out like a typical 1 year training cycle for a conventional Army brigade and
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like, going through like individual training, team, squad, platoon, CalFEX, CTC rotation, all the pieces. And he essentially breaks down each week or each day into like productive training days, like they move you up, um, like unproductive days where you're like missing PT, but it's fine. And then days that like consume readiness, where you're like in the field in like an intense enough way that it's going to like actively fatigue you rather than just not train you. Um, and he puts it all together and paints a pretty clear picture that we actually tend to deploy at our lowest state of physical readiness across the year because
Mm-hmm.
we get into the end of the training cycle and we lump together like a major brigade, sticks lane, CalFEX, all that kind of stuff, followed by like a reset period, followed by like rail load and then a CTC rotation, usually followed by like a block leave period. And then we come back and we deploy. And that's like a pretty gnarly combination leading up to the like theoretical peak. It actually means we like consumed a lot of readiness at a CTC rotation where you're sleeping less, not eating enough, not getting the training you need, but tons of physical fatigue put on you, followed by block leave, where as much as we wish it wasn't the case, a lot of soldiers just don't train.
Mm-hmm.
And then we say, okay, cool, we've finished certifying you, you're ready to go, which might be true in a collective task sense. It's certainly not true in a individual human performance sense.
Correct. I like that article. I was reading it. I had way too long of a wait for brunch.
Mm.
So thank you for sending me that.
Was it a good brunch place at least?
No, it sucked.
I'm sorry.
Not worth it. So is there any actual science for periodization? This is a fun stone to turn over. And I think that because we see it in textbooks, we see it in all of these old manuals, like surely it must be a thing, right? And I don't want to go so far because I have not read everything. I don't want to go so far as to say there is no science actually objectively supporting periodization, but I will tell you that a lot of the science out there that claims to be empirically validating periodization is not actually validating periodization. It is validating variety over
Mm-hmm.
no variety. And I'll unpack that a little bit. So, sports science in general, guys, it suffers.
Before Drew goes too deep, I want to interrupt and say this: what he's about to say is why it's like super, super important to read the methods sections on
Yes,
papers, not just conclusions.
100%. Now, let's talk about sports science. I don't want our research listeners out there to hate me for saying this, but I think one thing tends to be pretty common in this space, which is that a lot of the sports science that we read suffers from short time frames. So 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever. And they're also dealing with either, untrained or poorly trained subjects. Now, why would those two things be true? Mostly because you're dealing with college kids. And this was pointed out to me when I was in grad school. We acknowledged this kind of quote unquote weakness with literature. You're dealing with folks that have typically volunteered for a study. They don't have a ton of time. Maybe it's over summer break or whatever. You got a couple of weeks. You try as best as you can to tightly control your intervention. You do the thing. You draw your conclusions. If you actually read, to your point, the sort of methods section or any of the research around periodization, more often than not, what they are doing is comparing the periodized plan of choice with no plan at all. And what that shows us objectively is that variation is the critical aspect of effective training, not the periodization methodology itself. And I need to go back and actually find, because I read a phenomenal paper that looked directly at this. I need to find it because it was very eye opening. But nobody out there is comparing like strict block periodization to like they're just comparing it to no variation at all. And so I think one of the other things that happened quite a bit in the discourse last week online, but also in the broader discourse around the periodization critiques is that folks assume that when I say don't use periodization, what I'm saying is just make shit up on the fly. And that's not at all the case. Time dependent today, we'll get into kind of some of how I actually do things, but you can have variety in training. You can have, like I mentioned, logical training plans in place without subscribing to the prediction of biological adaptations that come with capital P periodization.
I'm I'm gonna hit some weird asides, because I'm Googling as you're talking to see if I can find any of the papers you referenced that you don't have on the notes document.
I gotta find
Um,
that. It's a Japanese
there
author, I think.
there is this will potentially like rattle some people, but we've got Dr. Mike Israetel in a video from a couple years ago saying expert says periodization doesn't matter. That's kind of fun. I'm gonna have to go watch that one later. Um, but I got one has struck me that, and this is like a severe detour, but I think it aligns with the argument. We've seen a lot over the last few years, like a surge and then a big drop off in interest in cycle syncing programming for women. And and the conclusion it has pretty much all come to is, and this is like I should contextualize this. Why would cycle syncing training be relevant in a conversation about periodization? You you have like a structured, relatively predictable monthly fluctuation in variables that affect adaptation to different types of stimulus, right? Like that should be asking for a model like periodization to work. As it turns out, well, all those variations absolutely do affect training and how ready people feel for different types of training on certain days and what they respond to. They don't really affect it any more or less than every other variable that
Hmm.
affects daily training readiness. So, like how well you slept last night, how stressed you are, how your day at work was, like just like a thousand other things. And as cool as it would be to be able to say that like luteal phase do this, follicular phase do this, the result is actually just like autoregulation is the solution
There you go.
because there are too many variables to account for. And although these ones are predictable, others are unpredictable. Sorry. And that's with something that is actually pretty predictable and consistent.
Hmm.
Like the factors that are unique to tactical are a lot less predictable and consistent than like women's cycles are. Sorry.
And I'm glad. No, that was you set me up beautifully. That was a great transition to the next part of this conversation that will frustrate people, and that's general adaptation syndrome. Um, guys, listen. We cited the NSCA's definition earlier. If you look at their work, they will tell you that general adaptation syndrome is just the absolute foundational underpinning of periodization.
Early in my career, it was very important that I be able to like draw
Yeah, the
a
stress
gas graph
adaptation.
on a
Yep.
whiteboard. Yeah.
And I'm here today to tell you guys the field of stress physiology left Hans Selye in the dust decades ago. Nobody in that space still thinks that general adaptation syndrome is a thing. However, for some reason, we still cling to it ever so dearly. Let me run down this really quickly. So Hans Selye, I believe I'm saying that correctly. Hans Sale. He's the one that sort of or didn't create. He kind of discovered general adaptation syndrome, and the way that he did that was by exposing rodents, rats, to poison, cold, toxins, surgery. This was a rodent study to look at the stress response to some sort of toxic stressor. It was
I
not.
Not to beat a dead horse, but people should read the methods sections of papers they use to cite arguments. Like, I'm not going to be specific to general adaptation syndrome, but like the way rodent studies are done, if you're going to cite a rodent study as evidence for something going on in humans, one, probably take a look at the math on how many rodent studies ever actually translate to humans successfully. And
Mhm,
two, understand how those rodent studies are done in terms of like, especially in the nutrition world, like milligrams of the substance per gram of body weight of the creature, whether the creature ingested it or had it injected directly into their eyeball, because that's like a pretty standard way things are actually done for rodent studies is injecting the thing you're looking at straight into their eye for some reason. Um, anyway, back to you.
That doesn't sound very nice. Um,
No.
so we're poisoning rats or we're sticking things in their eyeballs. So Cellier, he identified stressors, but he never actually explained what makes something stressful. So, just to give you some more examples of that, the same exact workout can be manageable, it can be threatening, it can be excessive. All of that is dependent upon some of the things that you mentioned, the athlete themselves, their training history, their preconceptions about the workout, their sleep, yada, 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 yada. Stress itself is not a measure, like it's not we have X units of stress. A back squat is responsible for X, this many units of stress. It's not a fixed thing. It emerges from the interaction of a lot of things. And that's important because when we look at how this gets mapped to periodization, all we are looking at is this sort of biological assumption that stress can be quantified in whatever many units. It's a fixed thing. So it's not, and this is key because we've told you guys that periodization relies on prediction. General adaptation syndrome is not a predictive model. It's a descriptive model. So nothing in Hans Selye's work is telling you how much stress causes adaptation. It doesn't tell you when the resistance phase begins. It doesn't tell you how long it lasts or when the exhaustion phase will occur.
Drew,
There's
can I inject for a second real quick? Since you've
please.
now identified like the alarm, resistance, and exhaustion phases of the gas model that everybody is hopefully familiar with to some degree. If you're not, sorry. Um, Drew, what was the exhaustion phase in Hans Selye's original studies?
Rats being dead. I don't know.
Dead,
Dead.
not
Yeah.
tired, not sleepy, not like I need a high protein meal and like a day off.
Dead.
They were dead.
Yeah. And so I guess to sort of like explain it simply, right? The Selye model, this general adaptation syndrome model, it assumes a very biological um, kind of wavelength of stress, for lack of a better term. That's not how stress works. We throw around the word biopsychosocial quite a bit biological, psychological, social. And everybody, I think, listening to this recognizes that this is true, right? Like, think about a workout that you've done. Think about all of the things that contribute to how you feel going into that workout, while you're doing that workout, how you respond to that workout. And you could even do the same workout 2 different days and respond very differently to that. That's not a singular biological stress curve. That's a milieu of different factors playing into how your body receives, perceives, responds to, and adapts to stress. Now, I don't want people to hear this and think that I'm saying you shouldn't apply a quote unquote stressful demand onto an athlete to elicit some sort of adaptation. That's not true. How you apply that stressor and how you recognize all of the other things that factor into that stressor is one of the reasons why this model just does not work for periodization. It assumes that periodization is this kind of mechanistic approach to training. And quite frankly, it doesn't account for all of these other dynamic variations that lead into stress. So, homeostasis is what we think about all the time. Do you want to talk about allostasis? You want to talk about zebras and ulcers?
Um, I'd be happy to talk about allostasis versus homeostasis. I'm just like, as you're talking, I'm going down a deep Hans Selye rabbit hole on like the different methods he used. Cause I was already familiar with like the exercise ones where he forced him to swim or run.
Hmm.
Um, I I was familiar with the toxins one. I was familiar with the cold environment one. I was less familiar with the severing their spinal cords
Yeah.
as one of the methods.
He was not nice to
Um,
animals.
or just like inflicting various injuries on them and like seeing how they did. Like,
Yeah. So, I mean, basically what happened, right? If you look back into the history of all this stuff, like coaches saw this come out. And bear in mind, this was not a sports science thing. This was like a torturing animals stress thing. And they kind of recognized that the athletes that they were training sort of did the same thing. Like, oh, if I give them a thing, they get fit. And if I give them too much of the thing, they get less fit and they die. And so they just kind of co-opted it and they turned it into a forecasting model. And I think what's funny is that if you actually, Hans Selye himself commented on this at some point. He's like, I never intended for this to be like, he was kind of surprised that it was used in sports science. Um, again, homeostasis, allostasis, right? Like allostasis is a much more accurate depiction of how human beings adapt to their environments. And I think the key word there is that it's continuous. Like you are
Mhm.
constantly, your body is constantly taking in what's around you, whether that's a back squat, whether that's the music, whether that's a fight with your spouse, all of those things in one. And it's constantly modulating all of the things inside of you to keep you like alive and moving in the right direction effectively.
Which I think is useful in a couple ways, but like most notably, I something that I see or hear in like military fitness circles that I don't really run into anywhere else is the idea of like training to improve versus training to maintain. And and I don't love it because like you would have to so carefully calibrate your stimulus to achieve like exact maintenance. I think
Hmm.
the reality is you are either getting better at your tolerance to a thing or getting worse at your tolerance to a thing. Like unless you were completely zeroed out, you're either getting better or getting worse.
Hmm.
And I think allostasis accounts for that a little better because like the core idea with homeostasis is like you remove the stressor, then like everybody goes to like baseline where they stay. And that's actually one, not what happens. If you remove all stressors, you're just gonna like get weaker. And the whole point of introducing the stressor is you don't return to the same baseline, you return to a new higher baseline.
Correct.
Anyway,
So we talked about biopsychosocial factors. Let's run through a couple of those. And to kind of water this down a little bit, what I'm about to run through is just a list of things that contribute to how an athlete might respond to training. This is not a comprehensive or exhaustive list. It's just to give you some examples. So the obvious one that everybody knows is your training load parameters, your volume, your intensity, like yada, yada, yada. That's one factor of many. It's not the only. You have your genetic predispositions. Talk about a field that we are just tapping into and have no idea where it's going. Genetic predispositions for training. Your training history, so your legacy of previous stress exposures. I would argue that that is psychological. That's also social. It's also biological. So, how you feel about training, what your experiences with training looked like in the past, your transient biological, psychological, and emotional states, how you feel going into a workout. Are you in a good mood? Are you in a bad mood? Are you excited? Are you not? And then I think a big one that often gets overlooked, but that's a huge component in group training is your social and environmental variables. And everybody here knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you're on a rower and you're doing a 2K for time and an attractive person of whatever gender walks behind you, you're going to go faster. Hans Selye's general adaptations does not account for that. And he admits that it doesn't account for that. So, based on all of those biopsychosocial factors, I want to just hit on a couple of conclusions that we can make. Please listen to me. And if you want to argue these in social media, you're more than welcome to. Individual athletes will respond differently to one another to identical training sessions. If you give 10 athletes the exact same training session, you will get 10 different responses. Everyone knows it to be true, but they casually brush it under the rug when they want to fight with me about why periodization should work. To make it even more confusing, if you give one athlete the same session 10 different times, you will get 10 different adaptations to that same session. Again, tell me how that maps to a program where you can forecast 12 Tuesdays from now how much weight they should be putting on their back squat. Another big one in periodization literature, and I think science in general, is that group based patterns and observations are highly misleading when we generalize them to individuals. We've talked about this before.
I'm not going to turn this into a conversation about the new body composition policy, but
There we
like
go.
averages are only mildly interesting. Very few people are actually the average.
Yes.
And you're gonna leave behind a lot of outliers if you're committed to averages.
Is this where I should riff on progressive overload, or is that just gonna?
I mean, now that you brought it up, you're gonna have to do it. You're not gonna be satisfied if you don't.
And
Sorry,
I'll
guys.
write.
The Milo and the bowl thing is the opposite of the
Yeah.
real
So
thing.
I think this is another important point because I think it hints at general adaptation syndrome, and it probably deserves its own article, maybe its own podcast at some point. Guys, we have a fundamental misunderstanding of progressive overload. If you, we've talked about this before. We might even honestly have written about this before. But there's this Milo in the bowl thing, and you dropped this periodization graph that's in every presentation. Milo and the frickin' bull
Mm-hmm.
are in every presentation as well. And what gets kind of prophesied with that metaphor, it's this Greek story, right, of this kid Milo and this little bull. And as the bull gets bigger and Milo continues to lift this bull as he gets bigger, Milo gets stronger. And that's kind of the parable, I guess.
It's the causal arrow that's the
It's the
problem.
causal arrow that's the problem. People assume that because the bull got bigger, Milo got stronger. And I'll make this very clear to you folks. Because I add 5 pounds to my back squat each week, i.e., periodization, I get stronger. And they think this is how progressive overload works. Guys, that is not how progressive overload works. Milo was able to lift the progressively bigger bull because he got stronger, not because the bull got progressively bigger. Please pause, repeat, hit the 15-second, like a couple of times, just listen to that. Because that to me is probably the biggest fundamental misunderstanding in modern strength and conditioning. Is thinking that because I increased the stressor from 1 week to the next, my athlete got stronger. Because if that's the assumption you take into training, you are constantly going to be looking for ways to make sessions harder versus setting up a session, allowing an athlete to progress into that session, not changing anything, watching their rate of adaptation. And then once they maximize that rate of adaptation, or you hit some other predetermined metric by which you choose to change the stressor, then you change the stressor. I will use a very practical example. Let's say I tell Alex to go hit 3 sets of 5 reps at an RPE of 8. And let's say it's a deadlift. And let's say your RPE 8 for the deadlift on this day is 300 pounds. That on that day is what an 8 out of 10 level of intensity looks like for you. I think traditional strength training literature would tell me that next week I'm going to make you hit 305. And the assumption there is that we are going to follow this general adaptation syndrome curve and you're going to get fitter because we increased the weight. Realistically, I could give you that exact same weight, 300 pounds. You could do the exact same prescription and we could cage it with that autoregulation, that rate of perceived exertion, and we could watch what happens. And if you mark that as a 7, I know that you have progressed. But if you had a fight with your girlfriend the night before, if you didn't like the music that was playing, if you were tired and that became an RPE 9, 300 pounds, well, holy shit, if I tried to force you into 305, you're now at risk of injury. Next thing you know, you're online telling me how deadlifts are dangerous. And so I think when we talk about the risks of training or how athletes get injured or whatever, it's because we try to force adaptation through this false lens of thinking that that's how progressive overload works, as opposed to acknowledging how it actually works, which is a reverse causality to your point. An athlete can lift heavier weight because they got stronger. An athlete does not get stronger by lifting heavier weight. Pause for effect.
I just want to emphasize too, like the relevance of this to running, because we've had a little bit of discussion. I put something up on Mops and Mo's and asked the audience, the Instagram page, and asked the audience if we had ever changed their mind on something. And it was pretty cool, all the things people shared that they had their mind changed on. Periodization among them, fascinatingly. But one was, and this is something my mind changed on as I've been going through the Mops and Mo's journey, I think. But it was cool to see other people change their mind along with me. And that's the crazy amount of hype that went around zone 2 and like the need to like manipulate a bunch of variables and track heart rate and make sure you're below certain heart rates for certain workouts. And there is still like some truth to like make sure your easy sessions are easy and your hard sessions are hard and all that. But like, it's easy to read a little bit of that stuff and start to hear about like junk mileage and gray zone training where you're like somehow wasting your time in there. And I think one of the bigger things that changed my mind is I just like got around actual runners and
It's Dunning-Kruger.
and they're achieving much higher levels of performance than a lot of like people who are like getting coached on running in the military or whatever, like by strength and conditioning coach, like, and none of these people know what you're talking about. If you start talking about the zone models or periodization stuff or different, like they just have like a weekly mileage goal
Mm-hmm.
and they just hit it and they get faster. Like,
There was I might need to hit up Evan Pycon because I think he showed me this article forever ago, but it was a very successful running coach that only used 2 paces, fast and slow. And he would tell his athletes, you know, "Go fast," or he would say, "Go slow." And by virtue of just the way he structured the training and yada, 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 like, they progressed. And I think the point there is, like, please stop overcomplicating everything. Training shouldn't be that challenging or that difficult. Um, should we shift towards planning?
I think that's where we need to go. We're already
Yeah,
over an
we're
hour.
over an hour. This is gonna be slightly longer, gang, sorry. But
We
I would
gave
be
Drew a pedestal for this
I
one.
know, sorry. I'm trying not to pedestal too much. But I would be remiss if I didn't sit here and bash periodization for an hour and not give folks an alternative. The blog post will dive deeper into this than I will probably be able to on the podcast just because I want to be mindful of time. Um, I had originally used the term planning as sort of a counter argument for periodization. I actually think I want to shift that more towards navigating. And shout out to Franco and Pellizzeri. He's a guy that I was connected with. We're gonna bring him on the podcast eventually. But he had some great points, and I'll get into some of those here in a second. But
Can I hit something before you go there?
please,
Because I have cited Franco on this podcast before.
yep.
Um, and it's another one of these weird like trigger topics that get people fired up. The reason I've cited Franco is a paper he wrote, and I don't think he's the sole author. I think he was one of a couple authors on um, the debate between injury prevention and injury risk reduction, and how those are actually, in fact, the same things, and
Mm,
we're fighting for no reason whatsoever.
I think that's
Um,
most of the world, really.
so, like, that's just
Thank you,
my Franco and Pellizzeri.
thank you, Franco.
That was years ago when I brought that up.
But yeah, periodization versus planning, and I think that can get confusing for some folks because there are elements of planning in periodization. And actually, if
Mhm,
you zoom out even further, you could make the argument that periodization is a form of planning.
mhm.
Um, and so I want to kind of recalibrate that a little bit and use the term navigating because again, like I said at the top, periodization is effectively forecasting. Like you are forecasting adaptations, whether that's 6 weeks down the road, 12 weeks down the road. The model that I propose is much more to do with navigating, which to get a little bit nerdy for a second would just be kind of like the consistent triangulation between coach athlete expectations, training outcomes, and then whatever your objectives are. Which again, key point that a lot of folks miss. You can train towards objectives without periodizing towards objectives. So you can have a date on the calendar. You could even have a date on the calendar that has very specific performance metrics attached to it, i.e., a PT test or a selection event. You can train towards those by navigating the athlete there as opposed to forecasting when and how they're going to arrive. Where I want to give Franco a lot of credit, though, is that I entered into this debate from this perspective of planning at the time, using the word planning being the superior approach because it eliminated the sort of predictive aspect of periodization. He pointed out to me that really what we're doing is we're just shrinking the prediction window down to what we perceive to be an acceptable window, which I think is actually a pretty brilliant way of putting it. Because unless you are making training decisions in real time, instantaneously in the moment between athlete and coach, you are introducing an element of prediction. The question just becomes how comfortable are we predicting to a certain, point in the future. The argument I would make is that the more chaotic your environment, the tighter your prediction window needs to be. Tactical training, from what I can see, is a far more chaotic and unpredictable environment than the environments that are often cited in the literature when we use periodization as examples of how we should train. Olympic training cycles, professional sport, collegiate sport, these are less chaotic environments than the tactical space. So, in some sense, you can get away with a longer prediction window, but that's not evidence that that's the superior way of training. And when you introduce more and more chaos, more and more unpredictability, you need to shrink that prediction window And so for me, when we get into conversations around how to apply navigating, I just use a week. You can go longer than a week if you want. You can go shorter if you want, but just recognize the trade offs that come with those decisions. So
People who follow our programs will notice that training populates
a
a
week at
week
a
at a
time.
time.
Correct. And when I mentioned that I'm kind of writing this third piece to go along with these last two, that's really what I want to get into is like, okay, great, Drew. You tell me periodization is stupid, and you tell me that training is this existential journey and self discovery, which I would point you towards the second article. Um, so what? Like, how do you program? And so that's what I want to get into is like, no shit, how do you do it? I start with that week. I create that week based on what I know about that athlete. And then using the progressive overload example we just did, using using constraints, using all the things, you collect information throughout that training week, and that then informs the next week, which then informs the next week and the next week and the next week. Um, so I want to quote Franco here because I loved this from him. I didn't ask him permission to quote this, so if he comes on, I'll apologize to him. Um, but he said that most of the time, people predict when athletes are well trained, not when they are truly at their best. So in practice, periodization is often a way to move from a period of little or no training towards higher training loads until reaching a level that we know the athlete can tolerate. This is why I said, this is Franco speaking, this is why I said that periodization is more of an operational framework and can become a self fulfilling prophecy. If you move from no training to a high training load, when do you expect the athlete to be in the best condition? Usually at the end of that process. However, this is not always true, or is it true for a period, not a specific date? So that gets at, I think, a little bit of that peaking discussion that we were talking about. But the navigating piece of things, right? So you sort of establish your short term goals with your athlete. You shrink that training horizon that we talked about. So whatever you feel confident you can control within the sort of chaotic environment that you're in, you can currently maintain all of the important physical qualities, and that's its own thing that we can get into with regards to tactical training. You're not prioritizing one thing, or you're not doing a block approach where we're just doing strength and then we're doing power and then we're doing blah 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 blah. The way you structure your training sessions allows you to collect information in the form of, sort of assessments, how the athlete's responding. You don't need to inject this make believe like testing day that then informs the next 12 weeks of training. And then you're modulating all of your stressors, your volume, your intensity, your frequency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think the key takeaway, though, is that you're able to respond in real time to how the athlete is adapting to your training. You're not forecasting anything. You're not sitting down in your magical cave and creating a beautifully periodized plan that adheres to all the different lines in the graph that you showed me. You're constantly revising things as new information shows up. And if you think that you can do that in a periodized forecasted training plan, I would love to see an example of your programming.
That brings me to the last of the comments I'll draw out from all the social media discussions we've had. This one came from LinkedIn, and he said the scalability point on another comment is actually so potent. I think the nature of scalability inherently tends to stifle personalization. Tools help, none solve it. The alternatives seem to demand perpetual context management, which is soul crushing in terms of time economics, knowing each athlete, how they're responding, what their life looks like this week, redeciding constantly, not to mention hoping they're self sufficient enough to manage changes themselves. To me, every hour spent on program writing in front of a computer is an hour not spent actually coaching. I'd bet a lot of coaches would move away from the traditional models if the time economics didn't punish them for having large rosters. And and I thought this was interesting insight. Frankly, first because it like brings to light a lot of the conversation I've heard around AI in coaching.
Mm.
I saw some stuff early on about like, is AI going to replace coaches because it can write programs? No, AI is going to replace programming so that
Mhm.
coaches can coach. And there's this confusion of like thinking the programming is the coaching. Like the more we can put that on some degree of autopilot and allow you to do the stuff Drew's describing of like receiving the inputs that the athlete's giving you, whether they know it or not, they're giving you a bunch of information every training session and like adjusting based on it and communicating that to them. But it also speaks to like the reality of when you have a coach for several hundred or a couple thousand athletes of wide injury histories, training ages, ability levels, different goals, because frankly, not all of them, even if they're the same MOS, have the same actual fitness goals. A lot of them are more influenced by hobbies than their job, just a thousand other factors. Um, the coach ends up having to spend all their time helping make athletes more autonomous, helping make athletes able to recognize these factors themselves and do that navigating individually. And I just don't see like, yeah, is it like theoretically possible to do that in a very predictive, forecasted way? Like maybe with enough like AI tools and stuff that can like account for a million variables, possibly. It just doesn't seem worth it or helpful when you consider that the alternative is either the coach learns to do the navigating process or the coach is teaching more autonomous athletes how to do that navigation.
And I mean, I understand the argument being made. There is this, and again, I think this gets back to the misunderstanding about what I'm talking about when we talk about navigating or planning or whatever. Individualizing training for 1,000 athletes is hard if you think that training consists of 3 by 5 at 85%. Like, it is very time intensive. You do have to type a lot of things, and I've been there, and I've used that as an excuse not to individualize. But and I'll cite the video that we put out, the work capacity cycle that we're doing in Long and Strong right now. When you adapt more of that constraints-based approach, and like you said, you create some autonomy within your population, you're not necessarily creating 1,000 prescriptions. You're distributing training instructions to a group of athletes and then allowing them to navigate within those constraints while taking into account all of the things that we just talked about, all the biopsychosocial factors, introducing autoregulation to encapsulate a lot of those different things, teaching athletes how to read a plan, how to navigate rep ranges, whatever, whatever. And then, like I mentioned in like the long and strong example, letting them choose the movements in some case, letting them dictate the paces, letting them, because the other thing I think that gets really exciting when you start to train this way is that you inject so much novelty and so much athlete empowerment into your programming philosophy or your programming approach that like compliance, satisfaction, buy-in, like go through the roof. Like we talk about athlete centric all the time. That truly is what athlete centric training is. Like the athlete is playing a central role in the training process. They're not just blindly following a plan. Because saying 3 by 5 at 85%, all that tells you is whether the athlete can or can't. It doesn't tell you anything about how or why. You have to introduce some constraints to capture the how and the why. But I think when athletes start a training plan, they're less interested in the can and can't. They're more interested in the how and why. And so, again, at risk of going off like a hippie cliff here, read the article, debate with us online if you wish, but please, for the love of God, show up with an appropriate definition of periodization.
My, since I think we're wrapping up here, a thought that came to me as we were walking through this, and this is partially borrowed from a DM I got when I was posting about all this periodization stuff. I think even if you take all the periodization literature at face value, if you like believe it all to be true, which I think Drew has made clear that he doesn't,
Nope.
um, but if you do believe it all, I think most people would agree that like it exists largely as a set of tools to squeeze out that last 1% to make sure athletes are like as ready as they can perfectly be on the exact day for the exact competition, right? And that is like largely a conversation that is uniquely applicable to elite populations. Like I said, trying to get that last 1%. If you're coming for a conversation about squeezing the last 1% out of elite populations, there are probably better forums to come to than Mops and Mo's. There are a lot of people who are a lot more concerned about that than we are. We're going to be pretty focused most of the time on the vast majority of people. And the vast majority of people and a huge majority of tactical populations haven't really even squeezed out the first 50%, much less the last 1%, right? Like there's so much more to be squeezed out. Like we have all these debates about periodization models and like which approach to training is the best. And yet most of us are employed by an organization that has like a huge problem with obesity and a high failure rate on a 2-mile run where the passing standard is a 10-minute mile pace, or like tried to implement one single leg tuck and gave up because it was too hard for the organization, or like whatever the thing is, right? There's like you can get to we're leaving so much low-hanging fruit still on the tree and climbing to the very highest branches to find the golden fruit of periodization. Like what are we doing?
Yeah, and we were joking about that in the group chat the other day. Like, you've got people debating very intricately periodized strength training plans for soldiers who are failing their 2-mile. And if that doesn't like raise the alarm for these types of conversations, then I don't know what does. So I guess to wrap it up, team, I don't want to go so far as to say that periodization is dead within the entire world of sports science. I will die on the hill, though, of saying that periodization does not make sense for the tactical athlete. Why is that the case? Because, as we have shown, you cannot predict biological adaptations. And because you can't predict biological adaptations, you can't forecast training outcomes weeks and weeks into the future. You can pretend to if it makes you feel good, but it's not accurate and it doesn't adhere to any of the contemporary physiological science, biological science, medical science, psychological science, sociological science. So you can navigate, you can interject a planning model, which we've talked about, and we have articles coming out on that. But if you define periodization as just training in general, I can't argue with you online. Like, I want to debate you, but if you just have such a broad definition of periodization so as to encapsulate every possible training decision a coach could ever make, just take a step back and actually think about what it is that you do subscribe to and question whether or not you do comfortably feel that you can predict where an athlete is going to be 6 months from now. So I think we've probably, pretty well pissed everybody off. Wait until they hear us say that there's no such thing as lactic acid. That'll be fun. See you next week, team.
I feel like that one more people are already comfortable with. I feel like we've been through that loop. Maybe I'm crazy, guys, but
for future sports science. See you next week.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.
This week's episode is brought to you by Teamworks. Team, we all know that connected families make better supported service members. Teamworks keeps military families informed, engaged, and in the loop, all in one place. To learn more, visit teamworkstactical.com today.